There is a kind of advice that sounds helpful, sounds logical, and sounds proven. Yet over time it can become a cage. Not because the advice is intentionally wrong, not because the people giving it have bad intentions, but because entire industries can become trapped inside assumptions that once worked and are no longer being questioned. Imagine being inside a brown paper bag. From the inside, everything feels normal. The walls don't seem restrictive because they've always been there. You learn how to move around inside the space you've been given. You work harder. You become more disciplined. You follow the rules. But no matter how hard you work, you're still operating inside the same boundaries. Today is not about working harder inside the bag. It's about asking whether the bag itself has become the problem. And once you start asking that question, you begin to see things very differently. This is Steve Koleno, and this is Confidential Remarks. Most of us have heard the same message for years. Make more calls, work harder, stay disciplined, trust the system. And to be clear, there is nothing wrong with hard work. Hard work matters, discipline matters, consistency matters. But there is a difference between effort and effectiveness. If the market changes while the strategy stays the same, then working harder may not solve the problem. In fact, it may simply cause you to run faster in the wrong direction. For years, the answer to every challenge has been more activity, more prospecting, more outreach, more hustle. But what happens when the challenge isn't activity? What happens when the market itself has fundamentally changed? That's the question many people are afraid to ask because it requires us to look beyond effort and examine the structure underneath it. This is where the conversation becomes important. The people giving this advice are not necessarily wrong because they are dishonest. They're often wrong because they genuinely believe what they're saying. They succeeded inside a particular system. They built careers inside that system. They watched others succeed inside that system. So naturally, they continue teaching what worked for them. And if we're being fair, most of us would probably do the same thing. The challenge is that success can sometimes blind us to change. When a framework works for decades, it becomes difficult to recognize when the world around it has evolved. That's why this conversation is not about blame. It's about awareness, because the most powerful limitations are often the ones nobody can see. Let's talk about incentives. Every system is shaped by incentives, whether people realize it or not. In medicine, law, and financial advising, we pay close attention to conflicts of interest because we understand that incentives influence behavior. Real estate is no different. When someone's income depends on the outcome of the advice they provide, complete objectivity becomes difficult. That doesn't mean people are dishonest. It means they are human. And humans naturally see opportunities, risks, and solutions through the lens of their own incentives. The issue isn't character. The issue is structure. And before we can understand the advice being given, we have to understand the system that rewards it. Sometimes the advice that would benefit an agent the most is the very advice the system struggles to provide. Think about that for a moment. If a person's income is directly connected to maintaining a specific compensation model, how likely are they to encourage alternatives that reduce that model's importance? Not because they're trying to protect themselves, because the structure itself discourages those conversations. Every incentive system has blind spots. Every incentive system creates boundaries around what people are willing to question. And when those boundaries go unnoticed, important conversations never happen. That's why structure matters, because structure determines which truths become visible and which truths remain hidden. One of the biggest mistakes any industry can make is confusing a permanent shift with a temporary slowdown. When results decline, the first reaction is usually simple: work harder, be patient, wait for things to return to normal. But what if normal isn't coming back? What if the environment itself has changed? What if consumers have changed? What if technology has changed? What if expectations have changed? At that point, the problem isn't effort. The problem is adaptation. And history shows us that industries rarely struggle because they refuse to work hard. They struggle because they continue solving yesterday's problems while today's challenges quietly take their place. Every system has a moment when reality begins challenging its assumptions. And when that happens, there are two possible responses. You can question the strategy, or you can question the person following the strategy. Too often, the second option becomes the default. If the tactics don't work, the explanation becomes mindset. If mindset doesn't work, the explanation becomes commitment. If commitment doesn't work, the answer becomes more coaching. Eventually, the system itself escapes examination. The responsibility is transferred entirely to the individual. And that's a dangerous cycle because it prevents the one thing that actually creates progress: honest evaluation of the model itself. For decades, information was power. Professionals controlled access to information that consumers couldn't easily obtain themselves. That created enormous value. But technology changed the rules. Today, consumers arrive informed. They have access to listings. They have access to market data. They have access to research tools and artificial intelligence. The information advantage that once existed has narrowed dramatically. And when information becomes widely available, value has to come from somewhere else. The future belongs to professionals who help people interpret information, not simply provide it, because guidance has become more valuable than access. The people teaching today's methods were shaped by yesterday's environment. Their mentors influenced them. Their systems influenced them. Their incentives influenced them. Just as ours influence us. That doesn't make them wrong. It makes them products of the same framework. The challenge is that systems naturally reproduce themselves. Each generation teaches the next generation what worked before. And unless someone stops to question the assumptions underneath the model, the cycle continues indefinitely. That's why meaningful change rarely starts with tactics. It starts with perspective. Imagine building your entire career around a model that suddenly stops making sense. That's not just a business challenge. That's a personal challenge. Your identity is connected to it. Your confidence is connected to it. Your relationships are connected to it. Your success story is connected to it. So when someone questions the model, it can feel like they're questioning you. That's why change often feels threatening. People aren't defending a strategy. They're defending a worldview. And understanding that reality helps explain why transformation is often much harder than logic alone would suggest. The consumer of the future looks very different from the consumer of the past. They arrive informed. They arrive prepared. They arrive with information already in hand. What they need isn't a gatekeeper. They need a guide. Someone who can help them navigate complexity. Someone who can provide judgment. Someone who can negotiate difficult situations. Someone who can solve problems technology cannot solve on its own. The professionals who thrive in the next decade will not be the ones protecting information. They will be the ones creating clarity. If the market has changed, then our framework must change with it. That means creating systems where incentives are aligned. It means having honest conversations about value. It means focusing on measurable outcomes rather than preserving legacy structures. Most importantly, it means building trust through transparency. The future doesn't belong to those who defend outdated models. The future belongs to those willing to redesign them, because adaptation is not weakness. Adaptation is how every successful system survives. Every industry eventually reaches a turning point. A moment when old assumptions meet new realities. A moment when the familiar stops working and a new path begins to emerge. That is where we are today. These conversations are not easy. They're not quick, and they're certainly not comfortable. But they are necessary, because the future is not created by repeating the past. The future is created by questioning it. As we continue building this blueprint together, the goal is not simply to react to change. The goal is to understand it, anticipate it, and help shape it. The industry had its century. Now it's our turn. This has been Confidential Remarks.